great to see you. And hi, Nicholas, and everyone else who is joining our call today. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathy Ramsey, head of business operations and partnership. Oh, goodness. I don't even know what I do I? Anyway, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Kathy Ramsey from the Tourism Industry Council of South Australia, and I am joined today by my colleague Linda, who's going to give us a wave. Um, Before we start today's conversation, first of all, we'd like to acknowledge that we're hosting this webinar from Ghana country. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and acknowledge the traditional custodians from the various lands which you all join us from today. And their deep I'd really like to acknowledge their deep and ongoing culture and connections to their lands and waters around our state. I'd also like to acknowledge our commitment to accessibility and inclusion. We recognise and thank those in our community who advocate and speak up for everyone's right to belong and further amplify ways we can continue to do this. So thank you. So, for those of you who've never joined one of our In Conversations before, this is a short webinar series, a part of our Business Capabilities program, where we provide you, our wonderful tourism operators, with insights, advice, and education that continue to help you with business operations and planning. We really like to keep these sessions collaborative. Linda and I will be asking a range of questions, but you're only going to get out of it what you put into it. So I really do recommend you to use the chat function to ask any questions. It's the opportunity for you to pick the brains of our expert knowledge we have available to us today. We will just, in order just for a seamless experience, though, we just ask you to keep your microphones off on mute. If the opportunity to ask your question presents, we also will encourage you to take your microphone off of mute as well. This session is also going to be recorded and distributed for attendees afterwards as well. That's our housekeeping underway as I floored my way through that, I think, but we managed to execute it. Today's In Conversation is with our valued partners, Wallmans Lawyers. We've had a rich and long-standing relationship with Wallmans across many years. And we're really addressing today that running a tourism business really means operating in an increasingly digital world, from online bookings to handling customer data to even promotions across digital platforms. And now the new wave taking us by storm, experimenting with AI tools. While this all presents incredible opportunities with our business, it's really important that we do our due diligence and really aware of the risks, but also our responsibilities that come with this. So it's with my pleasure today that we're joined by Paul Gordon, partner at Wallmans Lawyers. Paul specialises in IP, technology, media, law, as well as corporate governance. And he is really a recognised expert on the intersection of law and technology. And Paul has a really keen interest in AI. And that builds on from that, really what today's session builds on from. So Paul took part in our tourism conference in June this year, for those of you who attended, and presented on cyber and AI. And this forms part of that ongoing communication, which is really critical we continue to educate our industry on. So, Paul, we're going to continue to have this discussion, talking about legal obligations, digital risks, and those practical steps that you should be taking in our business, in your business and our business. So welcome, Paul. I'd like to hand you over to Linda.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kathy, and welcome, Paul. It's really great to have you today to really unpack some of this stuff. We know that, as always, you deliver such an outstanding in-person experience, and we know that it will translate well across to the interwebs as well for more people across our state to tap into your knowledge. And also, lots of questions were flying around the room at conference and post-conference as well. So really good to dig into that further. So yeah, thanks again for joining us. And could you just start, just for those people who may amazingly not have heard of you or come across you before, tell us a little bit about your role and the type of work that you do with tourism and hospitality operators.
Yeah, absolutely. And like before I start, I also like to acknowledge that I'm on Ghana country and pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which everyone's sitting at the moment. So I've been working with tourism industries the past probably 15 years or so, and my work with tourism operators is everything from just general commercial issues, contracts and terms and conditions and things like that. But more often now, it is in the areas of technology that tourism operators are accessing, whether that is in relation to marketing, which is a significant one. So social media and AI content creation is a significant one. Privacy management, dealing with AI systems being used in finance, HR, booking systems. There's a whole lot of different areas in which we've been providing advice, not because we don't think people should use AI tools or use technology, you absolutely should, but just so that you do so in a way that minimizes your risk. And so me and my team have been working, as I say, in this area for quite some time, focusing on AI for the last 5 years. It really started more significantly about 3 years ago. But yeah, this is very much an area that we've been playing in.
Great, thank you. And you sort of touched on, you described a lot of sort of the platforms there. Like technology is such a part of our everyday lives now, and it's really kind of come in quite an insidious way, I guess. All of a sudden, where you might be a bit resistant to it, and then all of a sudden you're using it, whether you've kind of actively signed up to it or not, because or consciously, because it's just what you have to do to operate a business. So just in the work that you guys are doing and the experience that you've had in this space over the last few years, which is probably quite a lifetime when it comes to AI and tech in tourism, what are the most common legal risks you see tourism operators facing when it comes to digital tools and platforms?
Well, I think that there are a number, and if we start with AI, because that's the one that people are mainly talking about these days. I think at the conference when I asked for a show of hands, who in the room was already utilizing AI in their business, it was about 80% of people raised their hands to say that they were using it. I'm curious if anyone can use the reacts here in the meeting, can say if you are using or have dabbled with AI in your business. Anyone able to? I don't know if I'm. Yep.
Yep,
Thanks, Kathy.
Peter's got his hand up. Kathy is with, we are
Yeah.
grappling with it here. Natasha, yeah.
Yeah. So it's ubiquitous. I mean, even if you aren't intending to use the AI tools, if you do a Google search these days, the first result you get is AI generated, and it's a hassle to turn that off. The challenge with AI in terms of the risks that we see are a number of different things. The first and most obvious one is relying on it. So what I always say is that AI does a really good job at pretending to be smarter than it is. And because of that, it is very prone to hallucination. So hallucination is where the AI will give you an answer that is really convincing, but is completely wrong. And we are seeing many cases of that happening across industries. The lawyers are some of the worst. It's in the paper every couple of weeks. Lawyer X gets in trouble with court for relying upon AI cases that don't exist. But in a tourism context, it could be things like if you provided an AI chatbot, let's say, to talk to people about your property, and the AI chatbot gave information to your customers that was inaccurate or incorrect, they could potentially come after you for a false representation. And you can't say, well, the AI said it wasn't me. You are responsible for what the AI says. Similarly, if you are relying on AI for information on regulation and compliance, for example, and you say, well, ChatGPT told me that it was fine to have this particular fire mitigation plan for my property when it wasn't, that again is no defense. So reliance upon AI without verifying its outputs is a danger. And one of the things that we've been advising people on is, well, how do we manage that risk? Well, one's an education piece, making sure that people understand the limitations of AI and understand that what AI is delivering to you is not necessarily an answer developed in the way that you and I would develop it, but rather the most probable answer it thinks you want. And the example, sorry if anyone came to my presentation, I'm going to repeat something that I did because I think it's quite useful, is if I ask ChatGPT how many of the letter N's are there in the word banana, it will say 3, because the most common letter that people ask about in that word is the letter A. And so it's not actually going through and counting the N's. It's saying, what is the most probable answer to how many of letter X are there in this word? And the same thing applies to most of the things that AI does. So we just need to be conscious of understanding that it has its limitations. The other issue that we are starting to see is with AI-generated content, and it comes in on both sides. Firstly, the training of AI happens on copyright material that other people own. And there are about 10 lawsuits going on at the moment with reasonably high profiles, mainly in the US, suing all of the AI companies for training their AI on copyright material. That's not really a problem for tourism operators unless you're developing your own AI, which I'm assuming no one is. But it is possible that you could output something from AI, you could generate an image from AI, and someone could say, hang on a second, that is pretty much the same as my copyright image over here or my trademark, and sue you. So it's really important to make sure that you are checking your images that are generated by AI to ensure that they aren't breaching someone else's IP.
Absolutely. And that pull lends into something I was curious about in relation to AI and it being really increasingly a popular tool for marketing and that content generation and sort of for businesses to understand their sort of the risks, but also their responsibilities once that content is then put on socials or a website or a platform from that perspective.
Yeah, and so you've got firstly the issue about infringement. The other thing that you have is potentially issues about misleading and deceptive conduct. Because if I generate an AI image of my property or even tweak it significantly from what it is and put it up there and don't disclose this image was AI generated, someone who sees that and comes to visit my property and says, hang on a second, that's not the experience you promised. It looks completely different. That could be deemed to be misleading and deceptive conduct.
Right.
The interesting thing, though, is that Photoshop's not new, and this is just automated Photoshop effectively. So I think that it's not a new thing. I mean, you wouldn't, I would assume, go through and Photoshop images of your property to make them completely different to what is actually available, because it's just going to be a recipe for disaster. You don't want to. I mean, you might get it in a bunch of initial customers, but they're soon going to be leaving you TripAdvisor reviews saying that they were completely misled. So I don't think it's in anyone's business interest to do it. But the risk that we have at the moment is more that people become complacent and they might not realize what the AI tool has done if they're not looking closely at the images that they have. They might just say, make this image brighter, make it pop a bit more. And then suddenly the AI inserts a feature that isn't there and you don't actually pay attention to it. Because if you're doing it in Photoshop, you know exactly what you're doing. Yeah. But when AI is doing it, you don't normally have full control over all of the elements. So the same rule applies in the sense that you should always check what's being put forward. But there's also a disclosure element that you might want to disclose this is an AI generated image or something similar, which then lessens its marketing impact. And so you have this balance that you need to consider between risk and reward.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and some good, food for thought there, in terms of sort of best practice of what you should be doing when using AI in terms of particularly picking up on some of the things it's doing. And I really enjoyed your perspective of how it's not necessarily checking the number of letters in the word, it's just going on from a probability piece more than anything.
Yeah, because I think, sorry, just to jump in, Kathy, because I think, like we really see these tools as AIs and they're really sold to us as a way of being, more efficient, and increasingly they're taking the roles of, like last night I was watching the news and they launched it's an Adelaide product. It's a AI sort of um, verbal chat box, in terms of nowadays when you ring up your takeaway, they're saying that, the person answering the phone, people always ring during the busy time. We've now got an AI generated, it's like a voice message, but it actually interacts back with you to take that order. And that, so we have this increasing reliance on it for efficiency. And I just think back to, we've been doing some surveys lately around the impact of the algal bloom, and I've been using AI to help me understand those responses and what comes back. And there was, I was using it at one point and it was actually giving me a really false answer. And I knew, because it was quoting a figure that no one had quoted in the content, in the survey responses they'd given me. I'd given it all the prompts of like, please only use this data that I'm sharing with you. Don't take data from anywhere else. And it was still giving a really inflated, inaccurate figure that would have actually totally misrepresented industry's position on where something was. So it's a good reminder that we're being sold it and we're being pushed towards it as an efficiency, but it can be the worst employee that you've recruited into your business.
I think that is a great example of the dangers of it. And that's not to say it won't improve. I think that we are still in the very early days of the implementation of AI. And the difficulty that we have is that, as I say, it looks so much more effective and so much more useful than it actually is. And so because of that, we just have to be super careful. So I don't have any issue with people using AI tools. In fact, I think that if you don't, you're going to be left behind. But when you use them, you still have to do your checks. You still have to pressure test, because it might be selling you something very convincingly that is wrong.
Absolutely. And I'll use this opportunity just to encourage everybody on the call, if there's a specific question about how you're using AI within your business that you have for Paul, just to temperature check from your own perspective. This is a great opportunity to pop that in the group chat as well. So, obviously to check, Paul, you said it's really just important to, it's like Linda said, it might not necessarily be your smartest employee, but it is producing work for you. So, some tips are to make sure we check the output that it is generating to make sure it is accurate. What are some other considerations we should have about what's okay and what's perhaps not okay in terms of using AI as an application there?
So one of the other key risks with AI is that unless you are using a paid system, there's plenty of free ones, but if you're not using a paid system and have configured it not to do this, it will be learning from your inputs. And that means if you're putting your financials in there, if you are putting in confidential information, personal information of your customers, sensitive information about dietary requirements, religious things, etc., that is not just sitting in your instance of the AI system. That is being shared all around. And so you need to be very careful that you're comfortable with the information you're putting in being shared around. What I would much rather you do is use a paid system and configuring it so that it doesn't learn from your prompts. And that is a lot safer for what you do. So for example, in our business, we deal with a lot of legally privileged information. And so we have had to go through and vet very carefully, not only the terms and conditions, but also the technical elements of an AI system as to how it works, to be certain that it's not going to utilize any information for any purpose other than what we're doing. And to be honest, we're only using it for a bit of legal research at the moment.
Yeah. But that can sort of also apply back to that situation you talked about in terms of, uploading a picture of your property and you want to maybe alter that, make it lighter, and it could be generating a response to you based on other information that's been fed to them. Is that correct in that sort of
100% correct.
perspective?
And
Yeah.
the other thing is that if you don't have this done, once you upload that there, if someone else says, send me a picture of a picturesque property with green fields and a rustic building, they might be using your image to generate that for your competitors. So if you're not okay with that happening, you need to be very careful. And the other thing might be is, do you actually own the image that you're uploading? Because if you're uploading an image that is owned by a photographer who took it for you, that might be in breach of your license terms and you might get into trouble there.
Yeah.
So you need to be really careful about what you are putting into an AI system.
Absolutely. And those paid systems then offer another level. It doesn't take away. There's certainly those sort of responsibilities and risks you still need to be aware of, but it offers a level of safeguarding in terms of it's not learning from the data and the information you're feeding. That's correct.
Absolutely right. But be careful. It's not just that it has to be paid. It has to be paid and then configured. So I've just got a subscription personally to Perplexity, which is great, but you need to go in and you need to click the setting saying, do not learn from my prompts. Same thing with Microsoft Copilot. Same thing with ChatGPT's from OpenAI. You have to actually configure it, and you can only configure it in the paid account. Because it's the old, if you're not paying for it, you are the product.
And so then does that mean, like, if you do, like I've gone into Perplexity and I'm, dabbling away and I've not clicked that and I put some data in and then something happens to that data and someone says, hang on, you've done something that you've breached my data or whatever. If I then say, oh, but it was the AI and I didn't, the AI did it, that's obviously not a defense.
Correct. You remain responsible. The terms and conditions say by uploading content, but they pretty much all say this, by uploading content as part of a prompt, you warrant, so you promise OpenAI or Microsoft or whoever it is, that you own or have rights that allow you to upload that content. And so if OpenAI got sued, they could come and say, well, that's not my fault. That was done by Linda and she should be paying all of the costs.
Yeah. And then as you're saying, then if I own the content and I upload it, I'm then also giving ownership of that content to that AI tool to then do. I can't say you can't use my information that I've put in.
You are giving them a license to use it in the way in which they choose. So because of that, you need to make sure that this is unless you've opted out. So if you've opted out by using a paid system, then you're not giving them a license and they can't do it. And if they did, it would be a breach of contract. So it's all really important to understand what your agreement is with your AI provider.
So read the
and that's
terms and
important. I might
conditions.
segue to a slightly...
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely read the terms and conditions. The other issue that you're going to potentially have, this is more for larger tourism operators at the moment, if you are caught by the Privacy Act, and at the moment that's businesses with a turnover of $3 million a year or more, health service providers or people who deal in data, but they're talking about removing that exception. So in the future, this is going to apply to everyone. They've brought in new requirements in relation to the use of AI that if you are using what's known as automated decision-making, you need to be able to explain that as part of your privacy statement to consumers. So automated decision-making could be as simple as the AI system is going to be allocating rooms. It's going to go through and it's going to say, we're going to put this person into room 3, this person into room 7. It could be that you are doing it as part of your HR system to pick which CVs you're going to look at first, because you've advertised for some casual workers and you've got 50 resumes and you can't be bothered sifting through all of them. When that happens, you will have, if you're Privacy Act court, and this is in place right now, you need to be able to explain how the AI is doing that. And because of that, you need to consider, does your AI system provide what's known as a transparency statement or an AI explicability statement so that you can link to it in your privacy policy. Because if you can't, you are in breach of the Act. And the penalties for that are quite significant. So, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of fines can be levied against you if you don't do that. So it's important to pick your AI system based on how you're going to use it. Now, if you're just using it for marketing, if you are a small business and you're not worried about privacy at the moment, don't stress about anything I just said. But be aware of it, because when the Privacy Act changes, we're expecting it maybe in the next 18 months to 2 years to get rid of that small business exception. Then this will be very important, and you might have to change your AI system if you can't explain how it works.
Wow. So we've not only got to know how to use AI, but we've got to actually understand the logic behind the AI that's making the decisions for us.
Or at least be able to link to a document that tries to,
Yep.
to explain it. Yes.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yep. This sort of, I want to sort of this segue into another section of a conversation, but links into the fact of using other platforms and data in other platforms. And I want to talk about the considerations and curious about you know, the responsibilities that come with, you know, we're increasingly using, like, we're operating in a digital world. So we're using a booking system, we're collecting data, customer data through that booking process, through email signups, even Wi-Fi now these days. So if you're staying at, you know, the common part is a hotel, or even, you know, if you're a destination and you can log in and use a free Wi-Fi at a destination, you're generally collecting some sort of data
Yep.
of a customer in that process. What are some of the responsibilities? Obviously, there's a lot of risk there, but what are some of the responsibilities operators need to be conscious of when they from using those platforms and collecting that data, even though it might be sitting on another platform?
Yeah, so it is going to come down to whether or not the Privacy Act catches you. The other one which might catch some tourism operators is the GDPR, which is the European privacy laws. So if you are marketing your tourism offering to people in Europe, then you are caught by their Privacy Act, which is even worse than ours in terms of obligations. If those things apply, you have a duty at the point of collection to inform people what you are collecting, why you are collecting it, where it is being stored, and what they can do to find out more information. And that is quite a lot of information to be delivering. And I don't think anyone realistically does that these days, but it is a technical obligation on you. And we've seen in the last probably 12 months, the Privacy Commission moving from education to enforcement on these topics. So whereas before, if you had a data breach or if you misused someone's personal information, they would send you a letter saying, do better next time. They are now actually engaging in significant investigations, and they are starting to level penalties against even small operators for these breaches. And so it's really important to understand what your obligations are under the Privacy Act if it applies to you. When that happens, what you need to think about is, am I using personal information for the purposes of direct marketing? So if I'm taking information that I got from someone signing onto my Wi-Fi and using it to send them a promotional message, did I have their consent? Because that is one of the few things that you need consent to do. You don't need consent to gather personal information. You need to inform people, but you don't need their permission. But you do need consent to market to them using that information. Do I have a proper opt-out and an unsubscribe? Because we need to make sure that we are going to be able to comply with the Spam Act. So the Spam Act says that I can't send information to people in an unsolicited manner. And even if I do, I must have an operative opt-out. I had a client who was a pretty small business, one employee. They were marketing a particular product, and they got penalized with a fine which was over $80,000 for having an inoperative opt-out link. They had the opt-out, like the unsubscribe, but it didn't kick in time, and they got penalized a significant amount of money. So
Wow.
it's really important to be aware of all of the different obligations that apply when you are marketing to people, particularly online.
And I think that's a really great example, Paul, because particularly sometimes we go, oh, we're a small business, it's not going to happen to me. And particularly, you know, the risks, the responsibility still lies with you, but also those risks still apply. You know, you mentioned cyber breaches is a big one. We're seeing it daily. I think I woke up this morning, haven't read the full details, but I think IINet have had a breach overnight, and so
28,000
that's what we're
individuals.
seeing. We're seeing it play out from a media perspective, that big businesses are being compromised from a breach perspective. But this actually, small businesses are a key target, because we tend to go, you know, tends to be a few more weaknesses in those small businesses. The back door's left open, and it's sometimes a little bit more easier for the perpetrators to get in. I'd love to sort of dig a little bit deeper, Paul, in terms of, you know, data breaches happening. I'm running Kathy's canoe tours, and a data breach has happened through my booking system, but the booking system is with a third party. Where does that responsibility lie, and what sort of questions should I be um, asking myself and be informed and educated on as an operator? Because sometimes we're just like, oh yeah, this system's really good, it's going to provide all my solutions in terms of communication to to my customers and all these various things. But understanding, particularly with the rise of data breaches happening using these third-party platforms, where does my responsibility sit as
Yeah.
an operator?
And look, I think it's a really good point. The Information Commissioner released figures about a month or so ago, saying in the last quarter, I think it was something like 70% of data breaches were because of malicious actors. So that's really, it used to be 70% were due to human error. Now it is malicious actors. And as you say, small and medium businesses are actually a prime target because they don't have the resources to protect themselves, and they're generally pushovers. You might not be being asked for $1 million, but they might ask you for 50,000.
Yeah.
And if you don't provide that, your life's going to be very difficult. So I think that what you need to understand in terms of where the risk lies is, what do the terms and conditions say? Because some organizations, including organizations whose literal job it is to store your data, will say, we take no responsibility for cyber breaches. And you have an obligation, if you are caught by the Privacy Act, to ensure that the level of security provided by third-party providers is appropriate for the sensitivity of the information they're storing. So that's on you. You can't just say, well, it's with a third-party provider, I'm sure it's fine. You have actually a due diligence obligation to check, what are they doing with your information? Now, let's assume that there's a breach. If the breach happens on the vendor's system, so not yours, they have an obligation to inform you. Once you've been informed, if they are already undertaking an investigation, you are able to effectively piggyback on that. So if they're going to provide you with details of the investigation and keep you updated throughout the process, that may be sufficient. But if they aren't acting appropriately, if they aren't investigating and reporting matters to the Information Commissioner, then you have to do your own investigation. And in either case, you have to do a breach report. It's not enough to say that they're doing a breach report. If you have lost access to your customer's information, so it was in your legal custody initially and you're using a third-party vendor to store it, even though they might be doing a report as well, you have to do one too.
Yes,
So,
it's legally responsible to report that information, report
correct.
that breach as such.
And that's where we're seeing all of these investigations happen. So when we report breaches these days, we used to, as I say, you get a letter 3 months later saying, do better. We're now having someone saying, okay, tell me exactly what you did. How did you pick this provider? What due diligence did you do as to their security? How is the information transferred? What kind of encryption was used? Where were the files sent? How did the breach happen? Was it in your system? Was it in their system? What's your password management process? Like, all of these questions that I would hate to have to answer for myself. are being asked because they've massively resourced the Information Commissioner, because the public have started to get upset about privacy breaches, which is fair. And so the government has actually finally given the Information Commissioner the resources to hire a bunch of investigators and to dig into what are the circumstances leading to all these things happening. What I will say, though, is if you want to try and live your life without being vulnerable to a breach, it's going to be impossible. You know, you build a better lock, they build a better lockpick. What you need to be doing, I would recommend to any business, whether you're called by the Privacy Act or not, is if you were put onto the front page of the Tiser saying such and such a company subject of data breach, what would you say to the journalist as to what you had done to prevent this from happening? If you can't say, well, we investigated the systems that we were using, we asked questions of our IT service provider, we got insurance, or at least we looked into insurance, but it was too prohibitively expensive and we couldn't do it. What is the story you're going to tell that journo? Because that's going to answer whether you've done enough, realistically. Because if you haven't done those things, and not all of them need to cost a lot of money, asking whoever's your platform, do you have a security protocol to keep my information safe? What do you do if there's a data breach? Isn't going to cost you anything. And you'll have that email back saying, okay, we've actually got a record that we took an interest in the security of our customers' information. And that will make someone like me have a much easier time defending you if we ever needed to, both to the Information Commissioner and in the court of public opinion. Because that is one other change that's just come in as of the end of June this year, which is that previously individuals didn't have a right to sue you for a breach of privacy, and they now do. So as of the end of June 2025, the Privacy Act introduced something called the tort of serious invasion of privacy. And what that basically means is if I have interfered with someone's right to seclusion, that's really referring to standing on a road and taking a picture through someone's bedroom window. Up until June this year, that wasn't an offence. If I'm standing in a public place and I can see you, I can do what I want. Now that is an interference with someone's right to seclusion. But that's probably less relevant for many tourism operators unless you have, for example, cameras in your hotel rooms or in bathrooms. That would absolutely be something I'd be a bit nervous about. But the other one is intentionally misusing or interfering with someone's personal information. And so if you did that, someone could individually sue you. And they might not win because they still need to prove that they've suffered serious harm. It has to be more than hurt feelings and all of these things. But you don't have to be right to cause a business a hell of a lot of pain by suing them.
I think, and that's the thing. It's not about just it's sometimes winning or losing. It's that risk of being placed in that situation and that stress, resources, finance, pressure that puts on a business as well, from that perspective.
Can I,
Go ahead.
sorry, can I jump in? And sorry, I just had some tech issues. Speaking of, technology. And this is probably a little bit off track, but I'm just really sort of taken around this, this privacy and this right to seclusion and, how we, I guess, interact and monitor and keep track of, our customers coming into our business and just that thing around, like cameras and imagery and that sort of stuff and that right to seclusion. A lot of, accommodation operators are often small, Airbnb style, that we're seeing. And a lot of that, part of that security now is people are having security cameras installed. And obviously, there's, we read lots of stuff about security cameras getting hacked and RoboVacs also, being hacked and, video and contents created. And obviously people know don't put a camera in the bedroom or the bathroom. Like that's really a clear violation of that privacy. If my camera's in the backyard of my property, which fundamentally is fenced off, it's not a public space, is there a right to it? And I have it there for security purposes, but it's recording and I can go in and I can see my guest in my backyard. Does that guest have is that a breach of their privacy if they're thinking this is a secluded space?
So the key point is that last one, and that is if they think it is a secluded space. I think that you've got a real issue if you have not disclosed to the guests that there are security cameras on the premises. So I think that what you should definitely be doing is in your house rules or whatever it is, say we utilize security cameras in non-personal areas to ensure the security of our property. You don't have to say particularly, you don't have to point out where they are. You don't have to say, it's mounted inside the teddy bear on the shelf, but you do need to say we are using surveillance cameras for the maintenance of our security. Because once you've done that, there is no expectation of seclusion. You've told them there are cameras. And so anyone who might have had an argument that you have interfered with their right to seclusion has immediately lost that right because you've told them what you're doing.
Thank you. Something that cropped up.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you. And this is a really good question that Nicholas has just popped up in the chat. Thank you, Nicholas. But what's our responsibilities if the cameras get hacked and the videos of them are out there? So as in the videos being released.
Yeah, so the question would come down to what level of security did you have and was it reasonable in all the circumstances? So if you had an unencrypted security feed and it was being just stored in your email account, your email got hacked or similar, that would be something that you would be responsible for. If you could show that in all the circumstances you had taken reasonable security measures, then it would be difficult to find that you had breached anything at all. And the hackers would be the ones who would be able to be sued. But you do need to demonstrate that you had taken appropriate security measures. And so this is where it does become really important to understand who your vendors are. So if you're using a cloud storage provider to store your videos, if you are monitoring cameras remotely, what is the information encrypted in transit and at rest? Is the information being held on publicly accessible servers, those kinds of things? What country are the servers located in? Those types of questions are really important ones to ask to understand what your risk is, because again, how are you going to justify the position? It happens though, all over. So I'm going to use pick on lawyers because we're a fun and easy target. There was a company, a law firm, H.W. Ebsworth, who were the subject of a massive data breach, ransomware attack, and highly confidential, legally privileged information was being leaked on the dark web. What they had to do is they had to go to the court and get an order against effectively the world to say that no one is allowed to download this information because they didn't know who the hackers were. Now, what the Privacy Act has just been amended to do is to allow the government to do that. So if, for example, a hacking group got hold of intimate videos, the government could make it unlawful for anybody to download those. The e-safety commissioner could take action against anyone who was hosting those. So there are a number of different things that you can do to manage the risk. But the first thing you'd want to be able to say is that you had taken reasonable security precautions. I don't think we should fool ourselves to think that you can guard entirely against this happening. It can and probably will happen eventually, if not to you, to someone you know, because there is a significant business model built around the exfiltration of information, and small businesses are a great target.
Absolutely. So I think, oh, sorry, you go, Linda.
No, and sorry, you may have already asked this question and you may not be able to, and if you haven't, you may not be able to answer this, but say, the dark web, should you pay the ransom?
Maybe. I'd like to take the moral position of saying never pay the ransom, but we need to be pragmatic. With HWL, they've come out with some really good articles about their process, and they made the decision early on that they would not pay the ransom. It cost them far more than the ransom to hold out, but they made that decision, and good for them. If you're a small business and the ransom is $10,000, you may, sorry, one second. You may be in a position where you aren't able to afford the IT and legal support needed to deal with these types of issues. What you'll then need to do is make that business judgment. What I would say, and this is something I recommend to all businesses, is that you should have a plan. What is because the worst time to decide whether or not to pay the ransom is when you're being asked for it under time pressure. So what you should be doing is you should be saying to them, look, saying to your team, look, if there is a hack, who do we call? Who's in the room? Do we call our insurer? Do we call our IT people? Do we call our lawyers? Do we call our PR agency to deal with any blowback? What is our limit for when we pay a ransom versus when we don't? If we are going to pay a ransom, do we know which forms of cryptocurrency we are willing to use? Because there are some which are less objectionable than others. There are certain cryptocurrencies out there that are dangerous to purchase. And so how does one deal with that? There are all of these different considerations that you need to be able to make. And the worst time to do it is when you have to make them. So again, whether you are a large organization or a two-person outfit, having these conversations doesn't cost you anything. It really is worthwhile. And look, you might not follow what you decided. You might get into the heat of the moment where you said previously, we're not going to pay the ransom no matter what. And you get hit with, you think, actually, you know what? I can't deal with this. I'm just going to pay the ransom. That's fine. But at least you have taken the time and you would have an objective, cold assessment to pressure test yourself against.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes paying the ransom doesn't always resolve the situation either, does it, Paul? So I suppose what this really highlights, though, to be as we look to wrap up our session, we've got, a few minutes left, people, so continue to ask some questions if you have. But what it really does highlight for me is, we go into business and we look at those really physical risks that businesses are placed with, and you do your risk assessments and risk management plans. But a lot of people are looking at, educated to look at the physical risks. Now we're operating in a digital world with those touch points basically in every activity we do. So it's making sure we do adequate risk assessments from a digital perspective, and it pulls back to this line that Paul said, what have we done to prevent?
Yeah, because Kathy, it's very much, I'm really thinking about this and hearing you talk, Paul. We've become, if you live or work in or operate within a bushfire area, we know, at this time of the year, we're starting to think about what is our bushfire management plan? What are the things we need to pull on? That's no longer a weird thing for us to do. It's really quite common. We just need to apply that thinking to these spaces and these areas of operation.
100%. Yeah, so those measures, really encouraging people to think about those measures Paul shared with us today around our vendors, our cloud security, insurance. Cyber insurance is really critically important now. We insure from that physical sense, like Linda said, bushfire, physical robbery. This is now a really critical part, and they can be part of, you touched on a lawyer, your PR, your insurance, a part of that support strategy, having all those tools in place, having your tool belt in place before the situation arises, because that will help you manage the situation and be, and have a lot easier given the emotion and stress, and it's emotion because majority of people, small business owners, it's connected with your personal livelihood.
Absolutely. And I think that the cyber insurance is a really tricky one these days because it is so important, but it's also really hard to come by and really expensive. And so it's one of those things which is easy to say no to. But if you're doing that, you need to understand that you are then accepting the risk that if this does go wrong, what would happen to your business if I told you that you lost all of your online records and you had no way of accessing them at all, including your backups, because they often manage to infect your backups? How much would that cost your business to recover from? What if from a reputational perspective, someone hacked your cameras and were threatening to send out, naked pictures of your customers online. What would that do to your reputation, and how long would it take you to recover from that? Those are the kinds of questions you need to be asking yourself so you can make an educated decision about what you need to do to safeguard and protect your business.
I'm sorry, and I'm just conscious, like it's a really interesting space. It feels a little bit like the Wild West in a way, like we've entered this new space, digital tools are provided to us and, we look to them as efficiency and they make life easier. But there's a huge responsibility that comes with that. Just because something's easier doesn't mean you shouldn't be doing all of this homework and really understanding. And it feels really overwhelming. Like you're a small business. We're still working with people and helping them how to, understand how to use Facebook effectively. And that's been around since that's nearly 20 years old. And so we look at these tools and they come in and they help us. They're really great. Also, too, the world's open to us. It's easier to do things. It's easier to have all of this information. But there's so much responsibility that comes with that. And I guess, just thinking about we've got a couple of minutes left, and if anyone's got a question, pop that in the chat now. But Paul, and I think you've shared, I know what my top tips are. We're walking away from this, but what are your top kind of 3 practical tips that tourism operators should do to protect themselves in this really broad digital environment, from AI to social to marketing to security?
Yeah, but I think the best tip I can give you is be intentional. So whether it is looking at risk mitigation from cyber risks, whether it is looking at AI implementation, social media usage of digital things, know what you're doing. Don't just take a casual approach to it. Think about what tools you're using, think about how you're using them, what the risks are, and how you're going to manage them. So that intentionality can really assist. I think talk to other people in the industry and learn from each other is a really important thing to do. And I think that's one of the real benefits that Tourism Industry Council provides you, is that you've got this forum to learn from each other. Everyone, you might be with colleagues or competitors, but you're all looking at attacking similar problems. And it can be a great way to learn from people's successes and failures. And I think that war game everything. War game what's going to happen if it goes wrong. I loved Linda's analogy to bushfire planning. It's pretty much no different to that. What would you do if any of these things were to happen? How are you going to manage it? And what's it going to look like on the front page of the Tiser if it all goes wrong?
Yeah, very good. Very good thinking for us to step away with, Paul. For those of you on this session or watching a recording of this afterwards, where to now? If you want to continue this conversation, what I'd like to really encourage you to do is 3 things top of mind, really come top of mind for me right now is through our partnership with Wallmans Lawyers, we have a complimentary 15-minute advice line. Continue the conversation. I understand sometimes some of this is personal and intimate. So having a conversation offline is a lot more comfortable to do. I really encourage you. Wallmans have been a great service to not only to TIC SA ourselves, but our extensive community over the 9 years we've been together. So pick up the phone and we will do a post this webinar with the contact details for that to act on that. The second piece is TIC SA, through our programs, we have a risk module as well. So for those of you who are quality tourism accredited, think about your risk management plan. Like we sort of talked about, shift the thinking from physical to those other platforms, that digital operation of your business as well. Is that in your risk management plan? We have a Don't Risk It module to really help operators unpack and walk through that as well. And lastly, insurance. They can be, it's a really critical piece to have. Paul touched on that as a part of those measures to have in support. And I want to use this opportunity that we do have Gallagher's as a contact there for insurance for our industry as well. Again, pick up the phone, have a coffee, have a chat with them, but build that tool belt of resources, build that community around you to support so you have a better awareness and education prior to you being navigating the situation once you're in it. So I think that's my reflection on this conversation that I want to share with those on the session today. I'll hand it over to you, Linda.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy, and thanks, Paul. And I think, Paul's tip was there, talk to others in the industry. Wallmans are in this industry, a bit like Gallagher's. These relationships we've built is because these partners know tourism industry. So, you don't have to explain the nuances of tourism. It's automatically known. And Paul's amazing, and the Wallmans team are amazing at taking lawyering speak and making it really accessible and easy to understand and not fearful. I can see everyone's starting to click off as we hit lunchtime. Thanks again so much, Paul, for joining us. Millions of questions that I could keep asking. I feel like there's more and more and more I want to get out of your brain, and I'm sure others are the same as well. But thanks again, everyone, for joining in, and we'll see everyone next time, and have a beautiful rest of the afternoon.
Enjoy your
Thanks,
day. Thanks,
everyone.
Paul.
Bye.
Bye.